So as the title says, tools, tools, and more tools, or whatever I decide to make the title. But I thought I'd cover a little bit about tools, because that's one thing a lot of the videos you see from, even from me, and a lot of other channels, they show you how to do a lot of the electronics parts of it. Great, yeah, there's lots of great videos out there on electronics. A lot of times one thing I think a lot of people are left wondering is, well, what about all those tools you use? And I get a lot of questions about that. Where'd you get this? What tool should I use? What quality should I buy? So, if you're watching this, you're probably starting out in electronics. Now, a lot of the tools that I have are probably, actually a large majority, I should say, of a lot of the tools, because this is like, a speck of when it comes to the amount of tools that I have. Having been a mechanic years ago, I've got 2, 3, and 4 bay Matco, Mac, and Snap-on toolboxes with end wall lockers. I've got almost, I don't know, probably 40, 45 feet of running wall out in the one garage, and that's all it is it's just 40 to 45 feet of toolboxes. But like I say, we're talking about for electronics. Now, a lot of tools cross over. So, standard stuff, a lot of your hand tools, screwdrivers and whatnot. So, if you get one of those tools, it doesn't necessarily need to be a radio or a television or anything that you're working on. You can use that same tool in working on your car or working on your house, or a kid's toy or something. But by the same token, there are a lot of tools that are fairly specific to electronics, and they only do one thing. So I just thought I'd show some of the stuff that I use on a very regular basis. I wouldn't call them all, necessity tools. A lot of times you can get away by just rigging stuff up yourself. Trust me, I learned that early in life. A lot of times you'll need a tool. Even if one's made and you want to buy one, well, it's not going to do you any good if you don't have it in your hands at that moment. So you just end up making tools. When I was a mechanic, I used to do that all the time. It's amazing what you can do with a MIG welder or a TIG welder and some metal stock. But as far as tools goes, I've got some stuff spread out across the bench here. And like I say, this is just a very small sampling, but this is a lot of the stuff that I use on a fairly regular basis. A lot of it I use every day, pretty much 7 days a week. It's, there are certain things that are probably in my hand every single day. The day doesn't go by where I don't have it in my hand. Other tools, it could be a while. God, it could be a month. It could be a year, especially when you talk about some very specific tools. Now, quality. Now, that's the one big gotcha a lot of times. I tend to buy, I'm not going to say I specifically buy the most expensive tool I can get, because one of the advantages of buying high-end tools is, for starters, they usually come with a lifetime warranty. So if you do break your tool, it gets replaced. Now, back when I was a heavy truck mechanic years, God, seems like lifetimes ago, but, I used to break some tools, I'm not going to say on a weekly basis, but, if you know anything about big trucks, a 15/16 socket and wrench are probably the two of the tools you actually use the most if you're doing heavy work, suspension work and whatnot. Every nut on every bolt on a frame rail has a 15/16 head. And when you work on old salt, plow trucks and farm trucks and whatnot, they're always rusty. You're always breaking those two things, either the wrench, usually the impact socket. And even buying good ones, Snap-on, Mac, and Matco, you still tend to end to break those a lot. So buying a good quality tool, yes, it's going to break. It's more durable. It's for starters. It's going to last, and sometimes you might not break it, but if it does break, it has that warranty. The tool man shows up whatever day of the week he's scheduled to show up. You hand him the broken tool, he gives you a new one back. Now, in a case of stuff like this, you're not going to have a Snap-on Mac or Matco truck pulling in your driveway, probably. Most of this stuff, some of the tools are made overseas, like screwdrivers maybe made in Germany, but still, the American distributors can warranty your tools. Yes, you'd have to send them back, but still, you can get the tool replaced. And if it's something, if you're going to be doing electronics, maybe not so much as a living, but for even a serious hobby, if it's something you may wear out, every few years, in the long run, it ends up being cheaper to buy that more expensive tool because it comes with that warranty. Yes, you can buy the cheap Chinese junk. You use it 2 times, it breaks, you go buy a new one. And you just keep doing that. Well, eventually you're going to exceed the price you would have paid if you just bought a good one to start with. So that's always something to keep in mind. So let's just go over some of the stuff that I have here and some of the uses, because I think a lot of times people don't even realize there's specialty tools out there for stuff. Now, of course, the most common tools you're going to be using all the time are your hand tools. Now, we're not covering anything like test equipment today. This is all basically tools. Now, there may be a few other little widgets might get thrown in here that aren't specifically a tool, but I might consider them a tool. But, you know, the major stuff you're going to be using on a daily basis is going to be stuff like screwdrivers. Now, for years, and nut drivers and stuff like that. So, you know, now, you'll see, Snap-on. I've got several sets of Snap-on nut drivers. Now, if you're in electronics, actually the most common brand for, at least in the United States for decades, was Exolite. Very common, let's see, I even have the 3322? Oh, that's not it, that's the blue one, that's Phillips. A little green screwdriver. Every electronics repair bench has one of these, or at least used to. Yeah, the R3322 screwdriver, but made by Exolite. They've been around for what seems like forever, and they make tools, you know, very specific to electronics. But they make nut drivers as well. Now, one thing to be aware of when you're buying stuff like nut drivers, there's 2 big variations of nut drivers. There's hollow shaft and there's solid shaft. So solid shaft would be basically just like a screwdriver. It's a solid piece of metal with whatever tip on the end. These are hollow shaft. You'll run into a lot of times when you're taking stuff off inside of a radio or television or something, there's a lot of thread sticking out. And if the nut driver bottoms out right here, well, that's all the farther you can get on. So you'll start to screw something on, and then eventually the nut just disappears or comes out of the end because the end of the thread is hitting inside. Where this one, being hollow, as you can see, I can stick here, I'll just put my finger on there. You know, it's that deep. The thread would need to exceed that length for, you know, so that's the usable depth of this nut driver. But Exolite makes nut drivers as well. Now, nut drivers, that's not something you're probably going to be using every day. I'm sure some of the cheaper brands would be fine. Screwdrivers is one thing I've always been very, very particular on. Only ever really used Mac on. Whew, I'll get it right. Man, if either of my tool dealers ever heard me say that. So let me try that again. Mac or Snap-on is mainly what I've used. But here recently I've been switching to stuff that's more designed for electronics. Or it's companies that, I guess you could say, cater to the electronics industry, where companies like Snap-on, they cater to the mechanicals industry. So, you know, my brother, he's a maintenance mechanic at a bearing manufacturing plant, you know, so, you know, people like that, automotive, truck mechanics, tractor mechanics, any type of the maintenance industry, Snap-on, Mac, Matco, and then Cornwell and a couple others are the standards in those industries. Where when you get into the electronics industry, they're, you know, good quality companies also making tools, but they mainly specialize in the electronics industry. So like WIA, this one, the case of this one, Fellow, like I say, Exolite, you know, very common, especially in the United States. But that's one thing I'm really, really particular about, my screwdrivers. I have stripped out and broken more screwdrivers in my life probably than any other tool, other than maybe a 15/16 socket, because I have broken a fair share of those. But yeah, screwdrivers are the next thing. And it's not so much even that the screwdriver fails a lot of times. The problem is when you buy cheap tools, the specifications or the standards or the quality of the tips a lot of times aren't good. So the angles, just the way it's designed, you end up stripping the head out of a screw. Well, you know, if you strip the head out of a screw, now you've got a double problem, because now you've got to get the blasted thing out. You've done stripped off the Phillips or the regular, or in the case of this one, Robertson square drive. But yeah, so good tips fit very snugly in the screw. When you put in a P2 screwdriver into a P2 or Phillips, you know, number 2 screwdriver head, it should fit very tight. It shouldn't wobble. That's one thing you'll find. Good high quality screwdrivers fit really well. and you tend to not strip out screw heads. You may break the screw off, but yeah, very rarely will you strip it. So yeah, it's just something to consider. Good quality screwdrivers, buy a good set, last you for a lifetime. And again, if you're working on electronics, tools like this specifically, most manufacturers will have high voltage tools. So these are designed for working on high voltages, and that's why I have them. I have a whole set of these fellows that hang over in a rack made by that company. But it comes with in addition to the non-insulated shaft ones, it comes with high voltage rated ones. So these are meant for working on, if you've got 1,000 volts down there and you need to touch that circuit with a screwdriver, that's where these would come in. They're safety rated. Actually, let me find it on here. I know it's printed on this blasted thing somewhere. Oh, it's right there on the shaft. I don't know if that'll show up in the camera, but 1,000 volt. And it has all of the safety ratings. And that's another thing. Stuff like this, those safety ratings, you go with a name brand company like this, you can pretty much be assured that company actually did the test and passed those certification tests. If you get some cheap Chinese junk, let's say this Phillips screwdriver made in China for 50 cents, it may have those logos on there, but yeah, you ain't got no guarantee that it actually passed a real safety test. There's a very good chance your finger might slip off the backside here, touch this plastic, and you end up dead on the floor. So, quality tools, they're well manufactured to start with. If it's got a specification on it, it's going to meet that spec. But yeah, like I say, appropriate tools for the appropriate place. This is perfectly fine in most things, but when you're working on live high voltage, you want to be using stuff like this. There's tools made for that. There's other specialty screwdrivers. A lot of times you'll see me using this one in when I'm taking radio covers off or putting them back on, putting the screws in and out. This is for electricians, so not electronics like I deal with here, but housing wire, your wiring in your walls. This is a speed screwdriver. Mainly the electricians would have this because when they're doing the trim out phase, they get done a brand new house and they're installing all of the outlet covers and the switch covers. They carry this around, no electricity required, and it's fast. It's almost as fast as using a power driver. But yeah, just made by Greenlee. You can't even see it on here. Or no, this one's actually Klein. So Klein, again, they good high quality manufactured tools, and they cater specifically to that industry. Klein, where a lot of these companies specialize in electronics tools, Klein is more towards the electricians. But again, the tools cross over. There's this screwdriver can be used for in any industry. It's just a speed screwdriver, but very handy. Let's see. Where should I don't be sure where to start here on all this stuff, or just where to go. Miniature screwdrivers. If we look over here, miniature screwdrivers, you can get just a couple. And honestly, for the average person, you don't need this huge, gigantic, and also very expensive screwdriver set. And this isn't even all of my WIAs, because this also has nut drivers. And this is the metric nut drivers, and these are not hollow shafts. So this is a good example of the difference between a nut driver like this and a nut driver here. This one, the hole just goes, it just keeps going. You can see I can stick that one inside of it. Where this one here, I need something small and pointy, you can see it only goes in that far. That's it. If it's any deeper than that, you're pretty much screwed. So, just something to be aware of. But I've used a lot of different brands, and honestly, if you go to like the hardware stores a lot of times, now they're not going to have WIA, but like Home Depot and Lowe's, the big box home improvement stores, they usually have their store brand. What is Lowe's? Cobalt, and Home Depot is, I think, Husky. I've even used those, and honestly, they work just fine. Now, the tips may not last as long. They may not be as perfect a fit as a WIA, but honestly, for the average Joe, those tools work just fine. There's nothing wrong with them. But eventually you get to a point where you just want the best money can buy, and that's when you buy WIA, when it comes to precision screwdrivers. They have a really nice set. You just can't beat them, made in Germany. From really tiny size Phillips, up to larger sizes, but in everything in between. So regular Phillips, Torx screwdrivers, Allen wrenches, the nut drivers, and like I say, there's even more than what this stand holds, because these are the metric nut drivers over here. And I had, excuse me, I also had the SAE nut drivers. They also make other little specialty widgets like this. So, you know, this is a chip lifter, and that's what that's meant for doing. So when you desolder an IC, a lot of times the solder joints will still cold sweat, and you need to slightly pry up the IC to get it out of the circuit board. That's what that guy's little made for, you know. It's basically like a mechanics pry bar, but just micro-sized. And it's a great little tool. Comes in really handy. It's also handy for taking knobs off the front of radios when they get stuck. Now, you need to protect your faceplate when you're doing that, so put like a piece of plastic or something in there so you don't scratch up the faceplate on a radio or something. But yeah, nuts can get stuck on radios sometimes. Screwdrivers, this kind of falls into that screwdriver category. That's your alignment tools. That's something, if you're working on radios, you're going to be using a lot. Now, I'll reach over here to my shirt pocket. This is what's in my shirt pocket 7 days a week. The most common alignment tools I use are in here, you know, and not all alignment tools. There's a flashlight, there's 2 pins, there's a spudger, little plastic guy. You get these things cheap. I buy them by the dozen, you know, from China. It's just a plastic pointer and kind of like a screwdriver on the end, but it's great for moving stuff around in live circuits. You know, it's non-conductive but ESD safe. But as far as, like I say, for alignments, these 4 are the ones that I use the absolute most. I basically have, I guess you could say, 4 categories. Use them all the time, literally every day. Well, maybe not that one every day, but these 3 every single day. This one probably at least every other day. So that's why they stay in my shirt pocket. This one here it sits on the bench right over there, and these I use occasionally on a daily basis, some of them, but maybe once a week or so, so you know they're not being used as often. But I want to keep them easy. Just I can reach over there. They're sitting right over there. Very easy to grab. These are the ones that sometimes it might be a year goes by before I need one of the ones in this one. Now, for starters, there's different. Back in the day, you used to use pretty much the plastic nylon or Delrin style tools. So the plastic diddle sticks, is there? You know, my grandfather, and uncle had a radio TV shop. That's what they called them. Heard lots of other people call them that, diddle sticks. So, but they're plastic. Now, the advantage of plastic is if you're adjusting a ferrite core in something and it's stuck, you'll twist the tip off of this thing usually before you break that core. And it can be a pain to get a broken core out of something. Sometimes it's just plain impossible. You just can't get it out. So anything you can do to avoid breaking cores is a good thing. But I use, as you see here, these are ceramic. Now I think these are Pros kits. Can't even read it. All the lettering's worn off. But I think these were Pros kits originally. Actually, yeah, there's one Pros kit. Okay, probably, I'm pretty sure these are made in China. I don't think these are made in Japan. I think the Pros kits are made in China. But these are kind of the higher-end Chinese line of stuff. But good tools. There's another set here. Basically the same thing. This is another little kit. And I keep one of these in my shirt pocket all the time. Actually, let me put some of these other ones back. Getting too much stuff in my hands here. But this is a specialty when it's a Phillips screwdriver. Now, the red one in this kit is a Phillips screwdriver, but this one is not your normal Phillips screwdriver. And if you work on modern radios, so with surface mount components, you're going to be dealing with tiny, tiny little miniature trimmer resistors, and they have a little Phillips slot. And you would be surprised how many of those things I have to replace because they're damaged. They get damaged because people are using huge screwdrivers and they're tools that aren't designed for that. This little guy is. It's a Phillips bit, but it's flat on the end. It's almost like it was, you know, the tip was formed and then they ground the tip down. So it's very blunt, but it's specifically made to fit into those little tiny trimmer resistors. Now this is an Avon tool. Again, I don't think, doesn't say on here, I don't think Avon is a Japanese company. They might be. I'd have to look that up. I'm thinking Chinese, but they may be a Japanese company. But these aren't cheap. Now, there are cheap ones on eBay that you'll find, and Amazon and whatnot. I mean, like giveaway prices on ceramic adjusters. I got a set of those one time. Junk. Absolutely useless. Yeah, that's one thing I'll say. If you want to get ceramic adjusters, get the Pros Kits ones, which I just put away somewhere here. Yeah, the Pros Kits. And honestly, you only need 3 of them. There's the yellow, when it comes to the Pros Kit, the yellow, the red, and then there's a green one that's even bigger. They're straight blades. Now, I actually use a different one. This is Engineers. I know this one's made in Japan. Yeah, it's Engineer is the name of the company. This one's made in Japan, though, but ceramic tip again, but that's a larger one. But like I said, you get what you pay for, and a lot of times it's not just the quality of the tool is it going to break. Like I say, you don't want to damage what you're working on, so that's where the more precision, the little bit higher quality ones, they cost a little bit more, but trust me, you'll appreciate that quality in not breaking stuff. But other alignment tools, like I say, I've got these here. This one sits on the bench all the time. So this, I've got a couple of the smaller screwdrivers, the different Exolite screwdrivers, couple other tools. Now, a lot of this stuff just plain isn't made anymore. But by the same token, a large majority of it is. A lot of people ask about this kind of stuff. Where do you get your alignment tools? Just go online. Now, actually, you can go to eBay and get a fairly cheap set of diddle sticks like this. They're not going to cost you a lot. And it's they're basic kits. They'll usually have, I don't know, like somewhere between maybe 8 and 12, or maybe 6 to 12 different tools, something like that. And honestly, if you're only tinkering with 1 or 2 of your own radios, that's probably all you need. As far as quality goes, it'll hold up for what you're doing. If you're going to be doing a lot of work on radios and televisions, you're going to want to step it up and again buy quality tools. Luckily, GC Electronics, so George Charlie Electronics, has been around for years. GC is actually General Cement. So it used to be, I guess, a glue company at some point in the past. But for decades they have made alignment tool kits. And most of these tools I actually bought in kits. They're old radio, TV alignment kits. So you go on eBay, you'll find big rolls of them that'll have 30, 50, 100 different alignment tools in them. Honestly, if you buy those kits, you'll be lucky if you use 5 or 10% of the tools in them. Most of them are going to be this specialty type stuff, weird oddball ends you're rarely going to need, but occasionally you will. So it's one of those, and most of those stay in those rolls out in another room. I've got, God, probably thousands. I mean, I reach over here, where is that drawer? Just some spares I keep close at hand. There's a drawer out of my Gerstner toolbox, just with a few extras, and like I say, that's just a few, because I've got thousands of these blasted things. But yes, I tend to collect tools amongst other things. the true pack rat. But you get those cheap kits, they're fine. But yeah, just go online and look up GC Electronics. They have some smaller kits, but like I say, their tools are better made. They have tighter tolerances on the different tips. You can get them made in Delrin. They have fiberglass, tools made out of fiberglass. They're just more durable, and they fit better. And like I say, that's the kind of stuff you're going to need when you're working on radios on a daily basis. Let's see, what else do we got in here? Here's another little handy tool. It's really nice to have, a spring-loaded center punch. Now this one, I think, Snap-on. Yeah, it's Blue Point Snap-on. But if you're modifying stuff and you need a hole, the last thing you want to do is go to drill the hole in let's say a finished faceplate, and your drill bit walks off. Anybody that's ever drilled holes in metal I'm sure you're familiar with it. If you don't have a pilot hole or a center punch, as soon as you start to drill, the drill bit can wander off. Well, you just screwed up your faceplate or whatever you're drilling. Always center punch your holes. And like I say, it's handy, it's spring loaded, so you don't need a hammer to go beating on a center punch. And it's right here beside me all the time. And that's, as you can see, it's in my on the bench tools, because I use that a lot. Other tools, perfect place for getting cheap tools from China is for more modern electronics, for your, I guess you'd say, miniature electronics. So stuff like cell phones, tablets, computers, and whatnot is all the rage nowadays. So you need specialty tools to get into that stuff, because honestly, a lot of that stuff, they just don't even have screws, or you have to peel apart a cover to get into where there may be some screws, but you need specialty tools to get into that. You can get cheap kits on eBay, varying qualities and whatnot. Basically, it's just a bunch of little, they'll be different, and this is stuff I made up. This kit was not like this when I bought it. This one was assembled from just stuff that I've gotten mainly on eBay, but yeah, lots of combined to kind of make up my own little personal kit. But, from this little plastic wedge tool, it's actually, if you can see that taper there, so, it's really thin on the edge, but that's used for splitting cell phone and tablet cases open. There's all types of metal pry bars. Again, lots of plastic spudgers. I love my spudgers. More little plastic pry tools. There's, like miniature pry bar ends, lots of different variations, little spatulas, other metal prying tools. These are fairly common and popular in the cell phone and tablet repair industry. They're just, again, just a piece of basically thin spring steel, but great for cracking that kind of stuff open. And this is, I like this little kit just because it keeps everything centralized. But I store plastic razor blades in here because actually those are good for cracking stuff open sometimes. Guitar picks, yeah, guitar picks actually work rather well for popping some of this stuff open too, so you can go down to your music store and buy guitar picks. They also have little plastic wedges like this for cracking stuff open. Now, one place this is handy is not cracking open, let's say, a radio or, cracking open a phone, but if you're trying, remember I was talking about when you're removing a knob from a radio, because they get stuck, man. Some of those the push-on knobs, the spline shaft, they just plain get seized on the shafts. So you have to pry them off. You don't have much other choice. You really don't want to go grabbing it with a pair of pliers or you're going to destroy the knob. So you need to pry it from the backside. Problem with that is if you use something like this little guy, this little IC lifter from WIA, as soon as you start to pry, it's going to dent the faceplate usually. That's why I say use something like this. This little thing's perfect. It's fairly thick plastic. It's small enough where I can usually set that in the faceplate in between a couple knobs. And I can rock this tool so I can get that under the knob and then pry up, but I'm prying on this hard plastic here so I don't damage the faceplate. Let me get this little thing rolled up. And yes, it even comes with little suction cups for, like if you're removing the screens or you've broken the glass and you're replacing the glass on your phone or tablets. That's why most of these kits, a lot of times you'll find, come with suction cups. And speaking of that, it's actually, where is that hanging? Get it popped apart here. They even make little suction cup tools for separating stuff like that. So you'd stick this, in your phone, and it'll separate. The glass would stick in, let's say, the rear cover, but it allows you to pull stuff apart. It actually works. It's again, cheap little tool from China, but hey, man, for the price they want for these things, if it breaks, when I buy cheap junk tools, I usually tend to buy like 5 or more at a time because I know it's going to break because it is cheap. But I don't mind. If it breaks, I have a spare sitting here already because it was cheap to start with. But yeah, little stuff like that. If you work on cell phones and tablets and whatnot, toolkit like that's handy to have, and little specialty stuff like this. Let's wander around over this direction. Actually, let's start with this kit I've got here. So, I deal with a lot of RF, so radios. So, making coax cables. Honestly, I absolutely dread making coax cables. I hate it. It's just, I don't mind doing it once in a while. It may be, I don't want to say fun, but it's okay. But yeah, if I got to do any quantity, I'm going to buy the damn things. I just can't stand I don't want to call it wasting my time, but I've got better things to do than make coax cables. But a lot of times I need to repair a cable, or I do need one right now. So I've got tools for doing cable. Now again, you can get cheap stuff. So, from cheap coax strippers like this, if you're doing small coax cables, these little things, they work fine, honestly, for stripping coax cable. But again, it's cheap. It's only going to last so long before you break it. I've got lots of kits for working on coax cables and the crimpers and strippers. And this is just a few of them. That's what I say. I got piles and piles of tools. So, here's one of my universal, and this is, you can see it's an Ideal Industries, but it's got a coax stripper, but it has several sets of jaws. So all different crimping jaws. So, here's the one that I use this kit a lot for is type 58 and 59 coax cable. But there's lots of other specialty ones in here for all different sizes of coax cables. all stored in a nice little case. But very precision jaws. So this is for RG8 and N series style crimp rings. Now you can get cheap versions of this. Like I say, this one's a name brand Ideal, so it wasn't cheap. But you can get the cheap Chinese ones. And honestly, I'm starting to see some of the when it comes to crimping tools, man, some of the Chinese ones, they're honestly not bad. I mean, they do a pretty good job. Actually, here's a cheap Chinese crimp tool right here. Now, it's a name brand. It's a Iwis, I think, IWISS. This is for little small, what the heck are they? It's not Delphi, not Packard Delphi. What is it? Dunlop connectors, I think. Whatever those little terminals are, like I use on circuit boards for header sockets. These are the crimpers for those little tiny terminals. But these are Chinese, but man, I'm here to tell you they're about as good as a lot of the high dollar ones I have, from Trump Meter, Ideal, and other companies. Yeah, I mean, the Chinese are getting on their game. They're really starting to pick it up. Here's another kind of universal crimping one. Again, now this one's way more expensive than that Ideal. I think this one's probably made in Switzerland or Sweden. Yeah, Sweden. But these are the kind you would send out and get calibrated. If I was using these on a yearly basis, I'd be sending these things out to get them calibrated. And you can actually get, a lot of times if you see these for sale used, there'll be a sticker right here, and that's a calibration sticker. But really high quality crimpers, again, with lots of different jaws for different styles. Comes with the crimper for the center contact. So this kit's mainly for like doing BNC cables, but for the center contact crimper, so it's very precision. Actually I think it's more like 8 indents. It's 4 indents from the side. Actually, this might even be more than that. I think it's 12. I have to look down in it. 1, 2, yeah. This one actually has 3 rows of 4 jaws that come in from the side. The little indent crimper. A lot higher end coax strippers. And then with different jaws for different types of coax cable. Again, these kits aren't cheap, but you can pick them up on eBay used a lot of times. Very cheap. So that's one of those things to keep your eye out. You never know when you might run across something like this. Now, if you watch my channel, you probably deal with radios. You're crimping cables for your antenna. So if you go to companies like DX Engineering, okay, they sell ham radios. Shoot, I bought radios from them, all kinds of stuff, amplifiers, coax cables, and whatnot. But they also sell fittings, bare coax cables, so roll coax cable with nothing on the ends, and they sell the tools to service it. So you get these. It comes with the stripper, comes with the clamping blocks, and I call them clamping blocks because what this is meant to do is because trying to hold a piece of coax cable while you're stripping it or putting ends on it, where you're trying to put the ends on a lot of times, it's kind of hard. That's what these are made for. There's 2 different sizes here for different outer diameter jackets of coax cable, but that's meant for clamping it. So you just stick your coax cable, lay it in there. You can see there's little serrations in there, just really barely little ridges. But that gives you something, you can really grasp that with your hand. You can pinch it shut, and that way the jacket's not twisting on you if you use one of these. Comes with the strippers. So these actually have little jaw or cutter assemblies in there, and you just basically spin this down the cable, and it'll come out in a curly cue out of that slot right there. It strips the cable off. But like I say, really handy toolkits. And then again, now this one's for actually installing the fittings. You'd put the fitting in here and then you can screw that onto the cable, but this is meant to actually hold the fitting. But it also comes with the nice shear type cutters. Comes with a pair of like Exolite snippers for doing like the center conductor. But it's nice. It's an all-in-one box. You buy this, you can do most of the normal coax cables you're going to be using for antennas, at least the popular ones. And they have these kits. DX Engineering has these in different configurations for different coax. And pretty much all of your coax companies sell tools specifically for their coax cables. So that's one thing to watch out for. There is a lot of how do I want to call this? It's universal somewhat, but you have to watch it because outer jacket diameters on the cable can vary in thickness. The insides may be the same, but the wall thickness on the jacket may be different. So yeah, you need to watch it like for fittings. Some fittings won't fit on different manufacturers' cable. Again, more crimpers, and that's something I probably have, God, I don't know, 80, 100 pair of is crimpers, stuff like this. Now, like I say, these are, and this is probably one of the only cheap Chinese ones that I have, but I've been happy with it. It's honestly, it's worked well. Like I say, they're starting to get their game together with tools. But, I've got lots of expensive ones. These are Packard Delphi, I think. Yeah, Packard Electronics. Good quality ratcheting crimpers, other specialty tools. I've got, there's probably just 50 different ones like this that I have 50 different pair for different types of terminals. For insulated, this one's just for insulated ring terminals. That's it. You put the ring that would locate it in the jaws, but it crimps both sets because you can see there's like double jaws in there. And then it leaves a little imprint, so you know exactly which crimper was used. It's basically like an identification that a good, basically a good quality crimper was used to make the fitting. Other hand tools. These don't get used a lot, but they are handy. They're called cannon plug pliers. Military uses a lot of what are known as ITT cannon plugs. So they're multi-pin connectors. They come in varying sizes. That's why these are ratchet jaw. But they come in varying sizes, but they have a screw nut, kind of like a microphone connector, actually. That's what these are meant for, basically. Really large microphone connectors is what you could think of it. It's got a knurled nut. But it has like nylon or plastic jaw inserts that are basically sacrificial, but they don't mar up the nut. So instead of using a pair of channel locks where you're going to destroy the nut and damage maybe the surface finish on it, you use stuff like this. These, you can see the numbers are ground off of it. These were mill surplus, made in the USA, but they were military surplus, so they ground off the serial numbers that were probably etched into these things. And then that was bare metal, so I just took a little bit of gun bluing and re-blued the steel so it wouldn't rust on me. Small hand tools, pliers and wire cutters. I could fill up several toolbox drawers just with stuff like this. But you don't need a lot. Again, Home Depot, Lowe's, stores like that are good for getting decent quality tools. They're not going to be the best, but by the same token, they're not going to be the cheapest Chinese junk on the market. They're probably fine. Once you get into electronics a little bit more full-time, you're going to find you're just going to want to step it up and buy stuff like Exolate or from Xuron or Technic, I think. Yeah, Technic. These are all these blue-handled ones are ESD safe. Nipex. But you get what you pay for. Years ago, I had some cheaper ones, and eventually I'd just snap the jaws off. Cheap tools, you'd be squeezing too hard and bink, the jaw would go flying across the room. You buy good quality ones, they'll last me pretty much forever. But a good assortment of different wire cutters. So, flush cut pliers. This is the style that I mainly use on a daily basis here, is this style here. Now, of course, you don't want to use this on big wires. You're going to damage them. When you buy wire cutters, they'll always tell you what gauge wire they're good for. Pay attention to that. You don't want to go cutting wires bigger than what the tool is designed for. You'll damage them. And then you're just going to have to buy another pair. Use the proper size wire cutters. So that's why I got to reach around here. I've got the shear style, but I think these are Snap-on Blue Point. These are some crimper, but they've got big, heavier jaws for when I'm doing heavier gauge wires. Combination tools like this are handy. The only reason I have these right beside me all the time is it's not the wire cutters, it's not the crimpers, and it's not the strippers. The only reason I have these tools, and I used to use these pretty much on a daily basis. They're Thomas & Betts, really good high quality tool, but I've replaced the functions these do with other individual tools that do it even better. But the main reason I keep these is all these holes around here. Whoever the genius was that decided to stick screw cutter holes in these pliers, and it wasn't a Thomas & Betts invention. These things have been around for years, but it was genius So if you have a 440, 632, 832, or 1024 screw, you just thread it into this and go, and it whacks the head off, or it'll cut the screw to length. It's a great way to cut off a screw with no electricity, so you don't need a Dremel tool or a hacksaw blade or something. You just thread the screw in there till it's the right length, cut, done. And then you unthread it, and that's the other thing. If there was any thread, deforming when you cut it, well, when you unscrew the screw back out of the handpiece, it's basically like running it through a die, and it reforms the thread on the end. So, yeah, very handy to have those. Now, these are the wire strippers that I use pretty much on a daily basis nowadays. I've got a couple sets of these. These are not cheap, but again, that's one of those things, as you progress in your electronics, you start to do it more full-time, you might consider something like this. These have, God, there's probably like 50 laminations of steel in there, the jaws, but they're automatic. I just stick the wire in there, and it just strips the end off of it. The nice thing I like about these is when I'm doing stuff like ribbon cable, I can fit like 5 conductors worth of the ribbon cable wire in there, and a lot of times that's all I need is like maybe 3 or 4 strands out of a ribbon cable, so I'll strip that many out. I can just stick that whole piece of ribbon cable in here and go like that, and it strips all of them at the same time. Very handy. That's one of the main reasons I like this. It's just so fast to strip wires. Scissors. No bench would be complete without a pair of scissors. You'd be surprised a lot of times you need to cut stuff, fiberboard, whatnot. Main reason I keep these are good. These are actually electricians' scissors. I think these were specifically designed for like the telecommunications industry, for guys that are doing like, putting connectors on the end of Cat 4, Cat 5 E-type cables. But they're good heavy jaws. But main reason I keep these is I use these when I'm doing those ribbon cables. I need to cut them to length so I can crimp the IDC connector on the end. I want to do a good, clean cut on that cable. That's what these are for. And, because like I say, these are actually electrician screwdrivers. There's 2 slots there. That's actually wire strippers. So you'd actually just lay the wire on there and just kind of pull down in a quick motion, and it actually will strip the outer jacket off a wire. Very common. You'll see, like I say, telecom guys with these. Always have a nice pair of pliers. Again, that's one of those things I'm very picky. Have a good quality pair. I've got, these are older as in probably like 1970s vintage, maybe, channel locks. Really high quality, hold up really well. Actually, I just turn around here. I've got bigger ones. There are times you're going to need even bigger ones, so yeah, it's nice to have, an assortment of pliers around. Now, you won't use these as much as you do if you're working on, let's say, a farm tractor or a car, but occasionally you do need a pair of pliers, so it never hurts to have 1 or 2 floating around. Specialty tools. This little widget, I've shown this before in a couple times in videos. If you ever get the 1/4-inch phone jacks that have the knurled nut that hold it on, and you need to get that nut off, well, you can't. There's no indents in it. There's no nothing. It's just knurled on the outside. That's what this is made for. You can see down in there it's 4 separate little jaws, and it has knurling on it as well, but you can actually tighten down on it. So you would loosen this up, slide that over the nut, so basically, the nut would be in there, and then you tighten the jaw down on it, and it clamps down on it, and then you can just unscrew the nut with this. Great little tool. You can still buy these if you go, a lot of companies that sell guitar tools, so tools for working on electric guitars and bass guitars, they'll have these, because of course guitars have a 1/4-inch phone plug jack on them. So yeah, you can get these from companies like that. Here's another little handy tool. No electronics tool bench should be without. Strain relief pliers. I'll actually need to get out a strain relief, just in case there's somebody that's not familiar with what I'm talking about. Grab a new one here. So these little guys, you'll usually see on your power cords that go in the back of stuff. Trying to get these out can be a challenge. Even more so trying to install these without completely mangling the outside of this thing a lot of times can be hard, especially if you're using pliers. And most of the ones that I've ever seen, that's what it looks like somebody used, is a pair of pliers. That's what these are made for. They're strain relief pliers. That way you can put your wire in there. You can see the jaws, how they're formed. Okay? And they're very thin, but that's what they're meant to do. That way you stick the wire in there, and then you can really really tightly. You can clamp down on that thing, slide it in the hole, and then when you release it, it pops back out. And then when you need to remove it, same thing, because the jaws are really thin. This will just slip in between the back side of this and the back cover, of the sheet metal that this is going through. You can compress it and pull it out if you need to change a power cord. But yeah, very handy tool. And this is one of those things that's very specific to one use only. Strain release. That's all this thing does. Put that strain relief back in there. Let's see. IC installers removers. Another very handy tool. If you do a lot of integrated circuits, you're going to find, now pulling them out's not so hard. You can just use that little like pry bar thing to get them out. But they make specialty tools like these. These actually have jaws. You can see all the little teeth on there, and those would go in between the pins of an IC. But that's meant to grab around the pins of the IC, and then you can pull it out. There's this style here, and this is for wider ICs. But you can see it has jaws on either end, so that comes in, those little jaws grab underneath the outside edges of the IC. Again, you can pull it out. You'll also notice that all of these have little metal ears hanging off of them, or a post. That's so you can attach this to your ESD system, so your electrostatic discharge system. So like I'd take a clip and clip it on here and then run it down to my centralized grounding system if you're working on static sensitive stuff. But like I say, that's for removing. They also make tools for installing. Because usually when you get an IC, the pins, if you've ever tried to stick an IC in a socket or into a circuit board, it never goes in. That's because if you look at the pins, if you look at the end of the IC, the pins are usually kind of flared out a little bit. And you need to straighten them out so that's, so they're like that and to easily go down into the holes. That's what these are for. You just push the IC down in there, and that holds the pins straight so they're at a 90-degree angle. And then once you get it down in there, you push the little release button. Is this... I gotta look at this. This is one I haven't used in a long time. How does this one work? Push, release... Oh, okay, no. Actually, the push the button, that's why it wasn't working. If I push the button, that prevents the jaws from going in. So, I'd hold that little button on the side in. I'd insert the IC in there, and then when I stick this in the board, I could push this in, and if I need the jaws to retract, when you let go of that little button, you can see how those slide right there. But yeah, like I say, that holds the pins straight, so it's very easy to place in make them for your smaller ICs, same exact thing. But the IC just sits in there. And another thing you'll notice, a lot of these tools have pin straighteners built into the side of it, so if a pin gets bent in, you can just push the IC down in there, and that helps to straighten out all the, the pins. Again, another IC installer for larger one. Most of these are made by this company right here, OK Industries. They make really good tools. Actually, they also make stuff like this for wire wrap. Yes, that's still around. But yeah, again, has the little plunger, so once you get the IC installed, you just push down on that to pop the tool off of it without pulling the IC back out of the board. Even just cheap little IC pullers like this work okay. It's just a piece of basically cheap spring steel with... It basically works on the same principle as this tool. It's just a lot cheaper and simpler. But they work. They work okay. So yeah, we've got some wire unwrapping tools. Now, I'm not going to get into wire wrapping. That's an art unto itself, and there's a lot of specialty tools for that. But usually what I'm working on, I don't need to wire wrap. A lot of times I'll just resolder a wire back onto the post. Manufacturers used wire wrap back in the day in some of the earlier like CB radios, because it's fast. It can do it in production line really fast, and there's no soldering required. They just stick the tool in there and zip, and the wire connection's done. But if you ever need to service that, trying to manually unwrap all that wire off one of those posts can be a bit time-consuming, because usually the wire just keeps breaking off. That's what these little tools are for. They got a little spiral groove cut around them, and that's what you do. You just spin this around, and it'll unwrap the wire off of the post, and they come in different sizes for different size wire wrap jobs. May seem strange to have a pencil on the bench, but that's actually a very handy, I'd almost consider it a tool, what I call preacher pencil. So it's just a multicolored pencil made by Pentel. Fantastic pencils. These are great, and I've shown this in videos before, highlighting schematics, circuit traces, so like a VCC rail or a ground rail or a 5-volt rail or something. You'd be surprised how much easier it is troubleshooting stuff just by tracing out some of the major circuits a lot of times with something like this. Another specialty tool. This actually is slightly modified. So anybody, I've actually got one sitting here, I can't remember where I put it. There it is. Microphone jacks. Anybody that's ever tried to get these nuts, and they come in different sizes. So you have the four, it's a spanner nut, what they call face spanner. So there's 4 little slots in the face of the nut. If I take it off, you can see them a little bit better. But there's 4 slots you can see there in the end of the nut. Okay? But usually, well, not usually, pretty much always, they'll have Loctite on there. So they're hard to get off. And you look at most of these on most radios, if they've ever been removed, they're mangled. That's because somebody was using whatever they had, 2 screwdrivers and a hammer, I don't know, whatever they use. It's hard to find the actual tools for these because they do come in different sizes. There's this size. There's the size that, like this would handle the smaller ones for like on 1/4-inch phone plug jacks, but they're not knurled on the outside. Some of them will have 2 spanner nut slots. Even the little small, like 1/8 inch and even the 16th inch phono jacks or phone jacks will have the same thing. They'll have the slots. I've just had to, over the years, come up with a bunch of different ones. Actually, I don't know why I laid that over there. This is actually an antenna socket, so it's an antenna nut socket for a car. But it was just the right size to fit over the threads with no modification. The pins were a little bit too wide, but I filed those flat, and now this fits on there perfect. It's the ultimate tool for removing and installing these nuts damage-free. It's basically just like using the tool the factory would have used now. Like I say, a little bit of ingenuity. There wasn't a tool available. I took an existing tool, just a little bit of modification, and it works great. Speaking of modification, if you're modifying radios, you're going to need some hand tools. Now, we're not going to get into the fancy stuff like chop saws and cut-off tools and whatnot, but for doing layout, and not just layout when you're modifying, but you may need to measure stuff, because when you're replacing like potentiometers, so let's reach over here and grab an actual encoder. I keep a little test when I keep on the bench here. Let's say I needed to replace that guy. Well, that thing comes in God knows how many different sizes. Different threaded area length, the depth of the body, the depth of the shaft, the diameter of the shaft. Well, you need to know all that if you're going to order this. Order a new one and expect it to be the correct size. So, and they don't need to be expensive like these. These are Mitutoyo, so, good high quality dial calipers, but you can get a cheap set of the Chinese ones. You're not going to be needing to take ultra precision measurements. You're not making a part for a watch. But you do need something to be able to measure the shaft diameter or measure the length, let's say, of the threaded area right there. Just easily look on here what the measurement is. Really handy to have these. If you're doing modifications, you need to drill holes. You're going to need to be doing layouts. Now, you don't need a carpenter's combination square, but a little small miniature machinist combination square like this is really handy. Has a built-in scribe in the end of it for scribing sheet metal. A small machinist roller, something like that's also really handy to have. A little pocket roller for measuring depth. Now, most of your calipers, you can use your calipers for measuring depth because you'll notice the metal comes out the end there. So you can measure from the tip to the bottom of this, and that actually accurately measures on here as well. But like I say, this little thing here is very handy for that. It's just it's a roller, kind of hard to see because it's old as the hills, but they still make these. This is a brown, I think this is a brown and sharp. No, this one's an LS Starrett. I've got both. But yeah, it's a roller, but it's a slide gauge. So you just stick that on, let's say, a faceplate or whatever, stick that down into the bottom of whatever hole or whatever you're measuring. Now, I also use this for layout, much like I would use this. I can just lay this on the side of something, hold a pencil, and just run this down the side to, scribe a line on something. If I need to measure something that's down in recessed holes, old school calipers are really great. The old ones like this. Once you get your measurement on here, then I can measure the distance with an actual dial caliper or micrometer. Measure from the insides here. These have their places. It's tools you don't use very often, but when you're doing layout work, if you're doing modifications, some of these tools here are really, really handy for doing fast layout especially if you want to keep stuff in line. Like if you're drilling multiple holes, that way they don't they don't go like this. It'll be in a perfectly straight line. Laying out stuff with a square is the correct way to do it. What else do we got here? Allen wrenches. Again, buy some good quality ones. Here's just a couple packs that I grabbed. I got these from pretty much every manufacturer there is. Craftsman, good. They last a long time. They're good quality ones. Allen brand. I've got Snap-on and Mac assortments like this. Get the ball drive ones. They're very handy. That way, if you're working off center a little bit, you can stick that in the end of the Allen head cap screw, but you can actually still turn it at a fairly extreme angle because they have the ball drive on the end. Scratch brushes. I've got over here, I carry in my shirt pocket all the time. I actually have 2 fiberglass brushes. So I have the one you'll usually see me using, honestly, almost all the time, is this one. These are cheap Chinese brushes. You get these things on eBay. They don't cost hardly anything. But sometimes I want something a little bit more abrasive. You can get the Rush Eraser style where they have fiberglass brushes. You can get brass bristles, or in the case of this one, these are actually stainless steel bristles. You can also get one like this. This one's made by Euro Tool. It's made in Germany. But again, now the fiberglass brush in this one, and this is more like a pencil. So when you push this in, it just releases the inside. It's basically 4 little spring-loaded jaws there. But these are hard. You'll go right through a circuit trace with one of these. These are very brutal. Where this brush here, I have no problem rubbing that on my hand. They're very soft and fluffy, but they're great for cleaning oxidation off of circuit traces. Mandatory tools on my bench, I would say. I don't know how I'd live without them. Some other things. You're going to be doing holes. You may need to, drill a hole and thread it. Of course, I've got tap and die sets of every... God, I even have British Whitworth. I've got standard metric British Whitworth and some other oddball thread styles. But you don't need big fancy tap and die sets. Usually you're working on electronics. You only need to do a couple different screw sizes. And usually you don't need a die. All you need is a tap. That's all you need. 99.9% of the stuff I need to tap in electronics is done with these two. This one is Klein. This was, again, made for electricians, but it works just fine in electronics. There's 3 different thread sizes on this end and 3 different thread sizes on this end. So this one is 6 taps in one. If it's not one of those, I can just flip it around to the other side. Very handy. Like I say, it's fast, it's convenient, it just sits over there. This one is a tap handle, but it has storage in the base, and so it's got a bunch of taps I've got stored in the handle here. Again, if it's not one that's on here, I keep mainly metric taps and some of the smaller ones inside the handle here, but very handy. That's it. That's all I usually need as far as tapping holes. Don't need big fancy tap and die set. When you drill a hole, you may need to, actually let me reach over here, you may need to deburr the hole, because when you drill a hole, you're always going to have a burr. Now you can use this for deburring and chamfering hole edges, or just enlarging a hole. This is made by General, but mainly electricians use these. But it's great for enlarging a hole really quick if you just need to enlarge it a little bit and you don't want to have to go get a drill. Once you've drilled a hole, like I say, you'll have a burr. Get yourself a cheap deburring tool. Once you drill the hole, you stick that thing through the hole and it just spins like that. That's a really sharp tool steel edge right there. It'll cut that burr rate off and slightly bevel the side of the hole. Dental picks and scrapers, I've covered that. When you're cleaning circuit boards, it's just an assortment. I've got, probably 100 plus different dental picks and whatnot that I use. There's some of the spatula styles I use the most, like this one here. I've actually sharpened the end so it's rather sharp. But one like this knife blade, this is great if you're doing modifications or if you need to replace a circuit trace. Instead of using something like a razor knife, I just have this one. I can cut the trace, and then I can usually get that, if my fingernail, let's say, was the circuit board and I'm trying to get a trace off of it, a lot of times I can just take this tool, just lay it on there and slide it underneath the trace and peel the damaged portion of the trace off before I install a new one. But dental picks, very handy. Let me take a break here, get a drink before my throat gets too dry. I'll be right back. Okay, got my throat all moistened now with a couple swallows of coffee. Something, I don't know if you consider it tools or not. I kind of do. When you're cleaning, so I work on mainly old stuff, so I got to do lots of cleaning. And people ask me what cleaners I use all the time. Honestly, unless you're buying cleaners in bulk quantities, you're probably not going to buy some of the cleaners that I use. Years ago, back when I was a heavy truck mechanic, I had my own mobile service. I did mobile truck repair out of the back of a box truck. I still have my box trucks. But I sold, or was a representative for Texas Refinery Corporation in Fort Worth, Texas. They have a fantastic cleaner line, line of products. That's mainly what I use. The reason I like their cleaners, that's what the only problem is when you buy from TRC, you got to buy in quantity. So like 6 1-gallon jugs, like their Big Red cleaner, which is what I mainly use. You can get a 45-pounder. It's a 6-gallon pail or 6-gallon jugs, and of course they sell it in drum and RBC or returnable bulk containers. If you need a pallet size container of it. That's more than the average person uses. I do use a lot of cleaner, but that's kind of the advantage of TRC cleaners. When I mix it up in a bottle like this, that's what's in this bottle, there's only about that much cleaner in there. That's about it. That's all I put in there, just a little bit. Maybe that deep in the bottle. The rest of that's just distilled water. You don't need they have absolutely no fillers, no nothing. Their soaps are just that. It's nothing but the demulsifiers, the emulsifiers, and all the different soap substances. Then they have lots of different cleaners. I like Big Red specifically because it is pH neutral. So it's NSF1 certified. You can use it in food preparation areas if you're so inclined. But it's pH neutral. So I know for a fact when I take this and I spray this on a piece of aluminum, I'm not going to etch it. You have to be very careful with cleaners like Purple Power and even Simple Green, and a lot of those cleaners, they're not pH neutral. They're either acidic, or corrosive, one direction or the other. They will damage ferrous metals, so be very careful of that. Or even just the coatings, depending if it's tin plated or if it has some type of phosphate coating on it. If you're using a cleaner that doesn't have a fairly neutral pH, it may etch that and it'll be visible. So you don't want to go damaging something, especially if it's a customer's radio. That's why I like Big Red. Don't need much of it, and it's their selling point for the Big Red product was it's safe on anything, not harmed by water. Doesn't get much simpler than that. If putting water on something doesn't damage it, the soap's not going to damage it. But by the same token, they also have cleaners that are caustic. They make stuff for in acid baths. They have Red Hot, which is an extremely high pH. You mix up Red Hot and crumple up a piece of aluminum foil and drop it in that and come back an hour later, there won't be aluminum foil left in the cup. It will have dissolved it. They make cleaners on both ends of the spectrum and right in the middle. But like I said, I just like their cleaners. I love their lubricants. They're some of the best lubricants on the market. Now, just for general cleaning, like I say, I use that in glass cleaner. Now, this you can easily get in small quantities. This you can get at a lot of hardware stores. It used to be for decades, Zepp was much like Big Red. They were an industrial company that mainly only sold in large quantities to businesses. But Zepp, here in the last few years, has showed up in hardware stores. So I buy this at Lowe's, the local big box store Lowe's. Foaming glass cleaner. It has a kind of a nice mint scent. It cleans really well and doesn't streak. This is what I use to clean. If I work on a radio of yours, this is probably the last thing, this and a microfiber towel, that's going to touch your radio. But occasionally you're going to need to scrub, because trust me, radios can get nasty, especially when I'm restoring a radio that might be a barn find. So, brushes. Yeah, I just got a cup, sits down on the floor beside me with an assortment of brushes, from paint brushes to artist brushes that I've usually clipped the bristles a little bit shorter so they're stiffer, to typewriter brushes. That one and this one, these are different types of typewriter brushes. Stainless steel bristles, you can get them with brass bristles. Gun cleaning brushes. Anybody that's ever been in the Army or actually in the military period, you're very familiar with this one. That's what comes in your weapons cleaning kits, as I throw it on the floor. But yeah, just an assortment of brushes for cleaning and dusting. Recently, somebody asked me, Mike, why is there a shaving brush on your bench? And, well, yeah, I guess it's kind of a good question. You know, why would I have a shaving brush on my bench? Especially considering I don't shave. I haven't shaved, God, probably since the 90s. You know, when it comes time to where my beard gets too long, I grab, wherever I put them, something like that. Yeah. Snip, snip, snip. Yep, okay, beard's good for the next year. That's all I do, because I have a full beard. This is used for cleaning. And I specifically bought this one. Now, this one's made in Italy or Spain. It's made in Italy. It's an Omega brand. Really high quality, but the bristles are nice and soft. I don't have to worry about them scratching anything. But I use this for dusting. So, you know, I've cleaned the radio, let's say, when I'm done working on your radio. I've cleaned it. The last step is the Zep glass cleaner and a microfiber towel. But yeah, just before I get ready to put a radio in a box, there's always some dust particles have migrated onto the blasted thing. That's what I use this for. This is great for just the final dusting around knobs and buttons and switches. That's what that's used for. I did modify it, however, and it's one of the reasons I bought specifically this Omega brand brush that's made in Italy. You can, if you just kind of go, you can pull this back part. You can't anymore. But there's a seam right here. This back part is separate from this, and this handle is hollow. So when I first got this, I just kind of went like that a couple times, broke the little very barely any glue there that was holding it together, popped it apart, and I filled this handle full of lead. And what I used was just, hold on a second, reach down here and grab my little tub. So when I clean out my solder extractor, I save that. I recycle old solder. There was a little tube that came with something, but, you know, that's the old solder that I've sucked off circuit boards down in there. That's what I save that for. I recycle it because it's lead, so I can either sell that to the scrap dealer when I go to the scrap yard, or a lot of times I just need some lead for weight. So that's what I did. I filled the handle up with lead from that, and then just poured in some epoxy on top of it so it doesn't rattle when I, you know, because it's all dried chunks. But yeah, just mixed up a little bit of epoxy, poured it in there, put the handle back. So now it's nice and heavy, and it doesn't tip over very easily because it's got a lot of weight in the bottom of it. But yeah, that's why I have a shaving brush on my bench. That's for the final dusting, basically, of faceplates usually. Let me get those back out of the way. And I could talk tools for days probably. I don't want to get too long with this video. Other things you're going to use a lot are tweezers, especially if you're working on more modern stuff that has surface mount components. Now, just for working on regular electronics, you're going to need just some general tweezers. I've had both of these for probably over 20 years. So these things, well, actually, I know I've had these for probably closer to 30 years. And it didn't come with that little green thing. I don't remember what that was, a button or something off of something. It just happened to have a hole in the end of it that fit right on the end of the tweezers. So it made a handy little thing. I just glued it on the end there. And when that's sitting in the coffee cup over there that holds all these types of tools, it's very easy to take this one out of the pack. It's very easy to see that green tip. But yeah, just some good, and again, tweezers. Try to buy, at least if you're going to be using them a lot, get some decent quality. Now, ones like this are surgical tweezers, and you can get used surplus surgical tweezers online. Again, eBay, Amazon, stuff like that. They're usually going to be made in the United States or Pakistan. I don't know why, but Pakistan always seems to have they make a lot of surgical instruments there, but they're good quality. And man, like I say, these things get the snot used out of them, man. They really I don't want to say abused, but they're very well used. And 20 plus years later, still ticking, still working just fine. Now, you're going to need something finer if you get into surface mount work. Now, there's actually two kits here. There's good tweezers and there's cheap tweezers in the same thing. And they're duplicates of the same thing. It's just one set are the Technic, same people that make the pliers over there. Okay, and they're, yep, just looking, they're made in Pakistan. Actually, so probably one of the same companies that makes surgical instruments. But they have very good precision tips, really, really well made. They just feel good. Just the spring tension feels good. And these only get used, basically the top layer, which are the good brand ones, the only thing they'll ever touch are new parts or surface mount components. The ones underneath of them are the cheap Chinese versions, and you can get these on eBay for next to nothing. They are cheap. But you know something? Honestly, they work just fine. The big thing is, these tips are not quite as precision, they're not as durable, they bend a little bit easier, but trust me, for the price you pay for these things, they're almost disposable. They're so cheap. If I damage one of these, I just shrug my shoulders and go, reach over and grab another pair. I think I bought like 10 of these cheap tweezer kits for a couple bucks a piece. You just can't beat how much they cost. Like I say, they're cheap. So these are good if I'm in somewhere where I need to maybe twist something and I'm afraid I'm going to, damage the tweezers. I won't use my expensive ones. I'll use the cheap Chinese throwaway ones. That's exactly what I consider these, throwaway tools. These are not. These I pay particular attention to take care of because they're not cheap. Where these, on the other hand, if they get damaged, who cares? So, and if you buy the good ones, they come in a nice little pouch. Cleaning again, just a straight razor blade. You'd be surprised how many times just a razor blade, old window sticker scraper or, paint scraper like this with just a regular straight razor blade in it really comes in handy for removing stickers and a lot of stuff. I've shown this in a matter of fact, I think I may have even done a separate video on this. This is a homemade tool. I get a lot of radios shipped to me, stuff that I've bought and a lot of customers' radios. Occasionally they get damaged. Poor packing. Now, when I package, I try to be very careful. But yeah, when you buy stuff on eBay or other online places, yeah, a lot of times people do a horrible job packing. One of the first things to take a hit is the antenna connector because it sticks way out, and it's usually the only thing sticking out the back of the radio. It'll get hit, and it'll bend the back of the radio. And it can be tricky trying to straighten that back out. Just take an old antenna connector, break out the center pin, thread a bolt, because luckily the threads inside of your antenna connector here are normal SAE threads. So I just took a bolt and 3 nuts, threaded them together, dunked that into some tool dip, so it's rubber coated now, threaded that into this thing. I soldered this, so that's actually solder in between this part here and here. Because this part normally would need to spin on your coax cable. But like I say, I just soldered it solid, so all I have to do is just screw this onto the back of the antenna connector. Gives me something to grab onto, and I can bend the antenna connector or that steel chassis that's all warped and buckled. It's very easy to bend it back straight with that. And just basically made out of scrap junk is what that was made with, more or less. You don't need to put the plastic dip on there. I just did that because it's something I'm going to be using all the time. Again, not really a tool, but these syringes, I get these things and I feel that what's in here is heatsink compound. I hate using heatsink compound in a tube. I hate that stuff. You get that, it's all over your fingers. It's like anti-seize. As mechanics, you call it jump grease. Well, you call it jump grease for a reason, because it jumps off whatever you put it on and it jumps all over you inevitably. Heatsink compounds the same way. I don't care how blasted careful you are, you end up with the stuff smeared all over everything except what you want it on. Well, if you use it in something like this with a fairly fine syringe tip, you have greater control when you're applying it, so you're not making as much of a mess. So less chances of you sticking your finger into it. So that's why, but yeah, I consider that a tool, is the syringe that I put that stuff in. Here's another wire stripper. Now this one is for Kynar wire, which, let me just grab a roll. It's one of the hard things to strip, actually. I use this when I'm doing circuit trace repair a lot of times. If it doesn't have to be a copper trace down on a board, it's something I can just repair with a wire. I will usually use Kynar wire. This is 30 gauge. It's really small, but the big advantage of Kynar wire is, if you've ever tried to solder a little tiny piece of wire like this, the instant your soldering iron touches the metal conductor inside, the insulation just rolls back. It just melts away. Kynar wire is I'm not sure, I'd have to look it up. I'm assuming it's Kynar, whatever Kynar is, but it's kind of like Teflon. It is extremely high temperature resistant. So, if you solder the wire, you don't have to worry about the insulation rolling back on it. But that's what this little stripper is for. This does from 20 to 30 gauge wire. Has right on the end there. So you would just line up, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, there's an arrow right there. You just line that up with whatever gauge wire you're stripping. Just take your wire, has basically inside there it has two V-jaws, like that, and they're sharp on the inside edge. And when you pinch this together, what it does is those two jaws come together like that, and then cut in on four sides on the insulation. So you just stick your wire in the hole, pinch and pull, and then if you can see in there, there's the piece of insulation, and there's the stripped wire. Where if you've ever tried to strip this stuff with a razor blade, good luck. You'll run a razor blade around the outside edge. Inevitably, you're going to nick the wire, and the instant you nick this wire, it breaks off. You really need something like this. And these are cheap, they don't cost much, and they work really well. And they seem to last forever. So, again, the proper tool for the proper job. Razors, yeah, it never hurts to have a couple razor blades around. This is the one I use for cutting packing material. This is the one, just my all-purpose Olfa cutter. I've had this since just a few years after I got out of the Army. You can see it's worn. It's been around the block. I used to work in the printing industry decades ago. I was a stripper. No, get your mind out of the gutter. Not that kind of stripper. It's film. It's what's called, in the industry, it's known as stripping. Film assembly. I did 2 and 4 color film assembly. Was also a plate maker. But yeah, I've had this thing for decades, man. The old Olfa cutter. God knows how many, literally thousands of blades I've had in this thing over the years, especially when I worked in printing. I could go through a couple of those in a day. But yeah, man, get yourself a good one. They'll last you the rest of your life. Torches. Really handy to have some little torches. I've had this one for several years. Now, I got to be honest, I've owned a lot of these things and always hated them. And I've had Mac, Snap-on, Matco, Cornwell, I've had some of the other Benzomatics, and there's another brand. And I swear, inevitably, they all leak. You'll fill it up, you'll come back a week from now, it'll be empty. It leaks out. I had given up on those things. I saw this one in probably a Lowe's or a Home Depot. It was a new model, and I was like, I'll give it a try. Last resort. I'm willing to give one more company a try. I tried the best. The Snap-ons, the Macs, the Snap-ons, all the really high-end ones, even those leaked. I mean, they worked fine for a while, but eventually they started to leak. I've bought this one, haven't had a problem with it since. I've had this for several years now. It worked great. Every time I hit the button, as long as there's still fuel in it, it lights. When you need to refill it, just use a pressurized gas through the fill port in the bottom there. But I have not had any problem with leakage out of this thing. So, if I don't use this for a week and I grab it, it still works. This, I didn't actually buy. A couple weeks ago, well, it's been over a month now, Isotip contacted me and said they wanted to send this to me. I had done a review video on this little thing, and you'll notice it's still sitting on the bench over there because I actually use this little thing. I actually like it. It's fast. There's no cord. It's battery powered. It's rechargeable, and it actually, for the things I'm usually using this for, like pulling the wires off of a speaker in a radio, I don't need precision heat. I just want heat fast. It heats up rather fast. And like I say, I don't have to worry about heating up a whole soldering station. And it's just kind of convenient. And I really liked it. It's a handy little tool. And actually, it did more solder connections. When I did that review video, I did a time lapse on that. It did 2 times or more solder connections than they advertised it would. But anyhow, that was a long time ago I did that. Well, they contacted me about a month ago and said, as a thank you, we want to send you the Isotip torch. So they sent me this little thing. It came in a fancy plastic box, but room is limited, and I usually don't tend to keep plastic boxes. But it came with the torch, soldering iron, a couple different soldering iron tips, a little blade. This actually had the sponge in it for cleaning the soldering iron tips. I just took that off, and I'm just storing the tips in there, which honestly I'll probably never use the tips. But yeah, so this, get it turned on here. Yeah, it's just a little hot torch. It's got the built-in striker, and then you can turn and you don't see a flame. That's just all that's doing is heating up basically like a little bunch of steel wool inside of there and blowing hot air out the end. But yeah, that's great for working. Doing heat shrink tubing is what I mainly use that for. I thought it might be too hot, but I found this actually works really good for heat shrink tubing. It's really easy to control because it's a small tip, and it's not an excessive pressure. trying to use something like this to heat shrink tubing, you usually end up charring the wire insulation and setting stuff on fire around it because there's just, too much flame. This thing has nothing but hot air coming out the end of it. It's not a lot though. It's not excessive, and it's, like I say, a fairly small hole, so it's very easy to direct. Yeah, I like that little guy. So yeah, I didn't buy that, but yeah, I would recommend that. I like it. I've been using it nonstop ever since they sent it to me. That's what I do, heat shrink. So I've done a radio for you in the last month. If there's any heat shrink in it, it was shrunk using that. Holes. You're going to be drilling holes. Now, I'm not going to get into drill bits. I'm very, very particular about my drill bits. When I buy a drill bit set, it usually costs around $350 to $380. I buy the absolute best American-made drill bit sets that I can get. They're usually, Cobalt from like Cleveland Twist Drill Company or somebody like that. But you get what you pay for with drill bits. I mean, there is night and day difference between even a good drill bit and a best. I mean, it's just amazing. But I've drilled tens of thousands of holes in my life in metal, so, I'm just very picky about that. But one thing you need to do a lot of times in a radio or a television or anything, a piece of sheet metal, is you need to enlarge a hole. Now, I had shown you, like, this little guy is great for enlarging it slightly, because you're doing that by hand, the old school way. But you can get step drills, okay? So this one I think is a Unibit brand, or is this a Greenlee? That one's a Unibit brand one. But yeah, you can get, actually I think this one's a Unibit too. Yeah, this one just has the titanium nitride coating on it. But these things are great. You can start off with a tiny little hole and really quickly. The nice thing, and it's the main reason I use these, I'm usually using these in sheet metal. If you have ever tried to take a normal drill bit, so let me just reach down here and grab one of the drill index. So, a drill bit like this. If you've ever tried to enlarge a hole with a drill bit like this, the problem with something like this is the instant it breaks through, it usually pulls through really quick. And you can damage stuff on the other side, or you could damage, let's say, the faceplate on something with the end of the drill as it comes in contact with it. The other problem is when it does that, if you're holding the drill very steady so it doesn't shoot through, a lot of times it'll buckle the sheet metal. If it's something thin, those two cutting ears, because they're at a very sharp angle, they get underneath of it, and of course you're holding the drill steady, it pulls up on it, and you can warp the faceplate on something, or whatever it is that you're drilling. These don't do that. The cutting edge, it's basically just a Christmas tree that they ground a slot into. So it's cutting on the edge. It's not cutting on an angle like this, so there's nothing to grab on the underside when it shoots through. It's just a flat edge that slowly cuts out the inside diameter of the hole. And they last, I'm not going to say forever, but this one's probably 15, 20 years old. And I have drilled holes through 1/8-inch plate steel. Probably dozens, if not hundreds of holes through 1/8-inch plate steel with this thing over the years. And some of the other ones that I own. And if you buy the good ones, the Unibit brand, or if you buy the ones made by Greenlee, or any of the, the higher end ones, they'll last almost a lifetime. They're just, it's well worth the money. Let's see. Looks like I'm almost out of stuff here on the bench. Probably some of the last little things to talk about. Here's some more screwdriver bits. This is just a block of Epay I made. A holder for these little small bits kits you can get. With just different handles and whatnot. That I've assembled over time, and you have some of the tri-wings and the specialty bits for working on like cell phones and stuff. But like I say, a lot of times they don't come with convenient holders, or the containers are just too big and there's no extra storage for other parts. So yeah, I just took a piece of Epay, drilled a bunch of holes in it, a couple quick passes with some spray varnish, and there, I got a nice little rack I can store all this stuff in. And it's made out of ironwood, almost indestructible. Files are another thing that you're going to need, depending on what you do, fairly frequently. From enlarging holes to deburring to just doing all kinds of stuff. So I've done Yes, I've done a lot in my life. I'm one of those people. I've done a little bit of everything in my lifetime. I've also done locksmithing. I've repoed cars. I can cut keys. I can pick almost any lock, even Sidewinder, laser cut keys. I've got all the tools for doing that. But yeah, I used to do key impressions. I'm not going to even get into how you do key impressioning, but this was my HPC, good high quality file set, but it doesn't have to be this. It can be cheap little file sets like this. They're perfectly fine for just fine filing, or when you're doing something, you're enlarging a hole a little bit, a switch doesn't quite fit, or a display, and you just need to take off a few thousandths of an inch. Little files like this are great for that. Of course, you get bigger files like this, and I've got bastard files that are, over a foot long, big, really heavy ones. But yeah, a couple files. Another thing that's handy to have is a diamond hone. I think it's Norton. Yeah, it's made by Norton Diamond. It's made by Norton, and it's a diamond hone. But yeah, the two little pads there on the end are diamond impregnated. That's great for, I can even, like some of my ceramic tools. So the tools that have the ceramic tips, this is about the only thing on the planet that you can grind that with because it's diamond. The diamonds are harder than the ceramic. But yeah, that's great for shaping some of those if I need specialty tips and whatnot. But yeah, nice little handy tools like that to have around. Now I think it pretty much... Oh, one last thing. Reach over here and grab it. You're probably looking at that and thinking, Mike, why is there a can of spray paint on your bench? And I think I may have covered this before. But I'll cover it again, because I almost consider this a tool, because it's something you use on the radio, when you paint a radio cabinet. But a lot of times if you're working on older equipment, there is no off-the-shelf paint. So in the case of this one, this says Robin T123B. That's specifically what color paint is in there. What I did was, I had one to restore for somebody one day, and they wanted the cabinet redone. So I sandblasted the cabinet. But where am I going to get an exact color match for that paint? Well, before I sandblasted the cabinet, I took it over to my local paint shop. And what I mean by paint shop is, if you do some searching online, maybe in your phone book even, what you're going to find is basically every geographical area, little communities around the United States, you're going to find auto body shop suppliers. Just in my area, I know of 3. And that's what they sell. Paint, sandpaper, paint guns, stuff like that. That's what they sell. Only stuff that caters to the auto body industry. Bondos and fillers and that kind of stuff. But they custom mix paint. And they can do a very precise job of replicating colors. What they do is they take what's called a profit reading. So it's a little tool, kind of like a laser gun is what it looks like, some high-speed phaser gun or something. But they just place it up against, so you need to take in your radio cover and have a clear, patch of paint that's still the color you want. But it takes a light reading. It's a laser, has sensors in it. Not exactly sure, 100% sure how one works because I've never taken one apart. But it takes a reading and gives them the light spectrum that it's receiving back into the unit. And then they can use that to mix up the paint. But they put it in a spray can. So they get these cans empty, okay? They'll mix your paint, they put it in the can, and then pressurize it. And it's the good paint, paint nozzles that can be turned so this sprays out not a big blob of, paint. It comes out in a fan wedge. But yeah, so if you ever need to repaint a radio cabinet, it's some oddball paint color that you just can't find anymore. Yes, you can. Just find your local paint supplier, get them to mix it up. They'll put it in a spray can. You can buy it in a quart or a pint or a gallon or whatnot. But usually, if you're just painting a radio cabinet and you're not an automotive tech, you're auto body shop tech, you probably don't own a paint gun and all the equipment to properly paint with. Spray can works just fine because, like I say, they have the good nozzle on there. So that's just something to keep in mind. So I think I'll cut it off here. Like I say, I could talk for days and days and days on end on tools, but I think this covers a lot of the normal tools you use on a daily basis for electronics, some of the specialty tools. I just mainly wanted to show that there is a lot of stuff out there, and this, like I say, this barely scratches the surface. I've got toolboxes full of tools, for automotive, trucking, and I've got toolboxes full of tools just for electronics. It can be as expensive or as cheap as you want. It's just the more expensive quality tools are going to last you longer. But definitely don't be afraid to buy used, especially name brand tools if they're the kind that have a lifetime warranty. But yeah, you can pick up stuff like this, specialty crimpers especially a lot of times. You can pick up stuff like this on eBay. These I think actually I got General Motors, because these are Packard Delphi, so these were for automotive type, which is the standard connector, crimp connector pattern. No, but I think from Packard, or basically from GM, these are like $180 a pair for actually this one and this one. I think these are like 180. I think one's like 160 and the other one's like 180. That ain't cheap. A lot of times you can pick up stuff like this on eBay for like half price or less. Or if they're poorly listed, somebody doesn't know what they're selling. I have basically stolen some of these crimpers that I have on eBay before. I've gotten them for like $5, $10 a piece. Some of these crimpers can run into the hundreds of dollars, like those ones made in Sweden. So yeah, keep an eye out on eBay for stuff. But there you go. I hope maybe that's show you some. Like I say, I get questions all the time about tools. Maybe this has answered some of them. And feel free to talk about them below.